Ancient Scottish natives were black claims children's book in bizarre diversity drive because we are currently having to undergo a massive blackwashing of our history. Because whites didn't do anything. We weren't around back in the day. We just appeared from space and just started taking over everybody's stuff. And it feels like arguing with Tariq Nasheed all over again. I wish he hadn't blocked me on Twitter. Tariq Nasheed was fun. But I used to have these arguments with him like back in the day. He was claiming that the ancient Scots were actually a race of black pygmy dwarves. Unironically, that's what he was saying to me. And I laughed at him and I called him retarded and he blocked me. And I'm really disappointed about that because I loved arguing with him. But, despite that, there is no archaeological evidence whatsoever for any of these claims. And I think they're going to talk about the ancient Picts, and there's a lot of information that we do know about the ancient Picts. But let's have a look at it. The tax-funded book of course it is a bid to paint ancient Scotland to be as socially diverse as it is today. It absolutely was not by any metric whatsoever, but maybe I'll save it for the end. A children's book has claimed that the ancient inhabitants of Scotland were black. The illustrated book, which aims to make Scottish history accessible to children as young as 4, claimed that Scotland has always been multicultural and diverse. This is a blatant lie. Because we've dug up the skeletons and we've DNA tested them and everything. Like, the closest of Central European links. Like, if it's Celtic, even the Picts all came from, like, Central Europe. Right, they did a very, very, very long time ago. Right, there is very few Pictish graves that have been found, because weirdly you don't find them around the cairns, and everybody thought that they were funeral mounds. And very rarely do you find them, but they're not funeral mounds. The cairns are for something else. I actually visited a cairn just a few weeks ago. The Corringbow cairn. The Corrin cairn. I forget what one it was. I visit so many. In the work, Picts, who lived in... Yeah, the Picts. I'll tell you about the Picts at the end. Who lived in northeast Scotland from 300 AD to 900 AD are portrayed as multiracial, with black monks, bishops... The Picts were not Christian. Religious healers and ordinary villagers, right? So first off, the Picts were not Christian. They had an ancient paganistic religion, which we can see from their cairns and from their carvings and stuff like that. Unfortunately, Picts did not have a written language. Very unfortunately, so you kind of have to glean what they were actually like, right? And one thing that was discovered when they actually managed to unearth like Pictish grave sites and they actually studied the DNA on them is they were basically an ethno-state. They were. I mean, like, in the hardest terms, where they didn't even like other whites. Right, it was a case of, there was a lot of inbreeding, right? But it was a case of, like, if you weren't a Pict, they didn't like you. The Picts did not like outsiders at all, very famously. I'll save it for the end. Creators of Carved in Stone, a storyteller's guide to the Picts, are even considering the possibility of giving free copies of the book to schools and libraries. Of course they're giving them out for free, because that's how hard they want to mislead you about the past. They're going to lie and rewrite history, or will try to warn us about this. Those behind the book said, "We are proud to bring together some of Scotland's leading archaeologists," fire them, because it's already been established, but anyway, with a host of queer, marginalised and disabled voices to dispel the misconceptions of the past. Okay, so you brought in political ideologues who lie constantly because we constantly catch them lying. We constantly catch them lying. So basically, as soon as they say, yeah, this is a group of multiracial and queer and right, liars. Everything I'm about to be told about history and culture from these people is a lie. All they do is lie. They go in and go, here's how I wish history was. Well, tough titty bitch. History is what it was. Tough. Right, it's basically disabled voices and multiracial and queer and mother. Wow, I'm about to be lied to. But anyway, initially pitched in 2021 at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, the book has since been partly financed by the taxpayer through the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. Yeah, basically, I realise that a lot of people on the far right and everything like do support taxis, but you're paying for your own demise. You're funding it. It's the ultimate insult. You're paying for your own extinction. But anyway, the book was originally planned as a role-playing game. That'd have been fun. But after the switch, will now be made available to the public free of charge. A Roman slighted me once. It said it aims to show the land that is now Scotland was just as multicultural, multilingual, and socially diverse as it is today. Lie. Total fucking lie. It totally was not. Right? You had the ancient Britons to the south, you had the Gaels to the west, you had the Picts to the east. Right? The Vikings came later. The Vikings came a little bit later. The Picts were just sort of dying out as the Viking Age was really starting to come around. The Vikings had been. I can't remember when the raid of Lindisfarne was, but the Vikings. This is the thing: is everybody thinks that Lindisfarne was the very first time that the Vikings came to Scotland, but they came to Britain. But there's a theory it could have been earlier. There's a lot of archaeological evidence on Orkney, Shetlands, the very far like John O'Groats like type of area that suggests they may have came earlier, and they did run into the Picts in the south. But the Vikings actually. Oh fuck! I'll save it for the end. Don't want to blow my load too early. Let's have a little bit of foreplay first. It is believed that ancient Picts inhabited Scotland from the late Iron Age until the around 10th century AD. Most historians agree that the name Picts comes from the Latin term picti, meaning painted people, which is true. We don't know what the Picts called themselves because, again, sadly, no written language. So the name that we get, Pict, which means the painted ones, comes from the Romans who ran into them. Right, and there's a famous story which I'll say this one because I'll forget all of it, right? The Lost Legion that went into Scotland and vanished, right? Did it happen? Did it not happen? We don't know, right? But the version of it is the Romans came, sent a legion into Scotland, and they vanished, right? There's two different versions. They vanished, and the Romans went, oh dear, right? An entire legion just vanished. The other version is one Roman was sent back with his hands tied behind his back and a basket on his back, which contained the tongues of all of the soldiers in the legion. And that was sent back as a warning. And that's when big old Hadrian went, nope. And just built the wall, built Hadrian's Wall. Eventually, they did push further north, and they built the Antonine Wall, which unfortunately was made of wood. So you only see some forts along that. You don't see any of like the actual wall. But yeah, that was one story. Whether or not that's true, I've no idea. Most historians agree. Oh, I've just read that. It is thought this name was given to them by the Romans who observed the tattoos and body paintings which were common among the tribes. Originally existing in small kingdoms, the Picts were unified into a single people around the late 7th century because basically there was a lot of culture. They were the same people, just some people went off and formed their own wee tribes. They relinked later and went, oh wow, we're kind of like the exact same. We have the same like customs, culture, religion, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, they just kind of like formed one singular cohesive people who were very, very famous for not liking outsiders. Pictish stones, sometimes you find them, by the way. Also, if you go hiking and you see a stone that's buried, like unearth it a little bit and have a look at it. Right, just in case, because a lot of these have been buried or they've fell and they've got dirt on them and it's just get buried as time goes by, and then call it in. I don't know the number, Google it, but call it in if you find these. I love finding these. Some of these symbols that you see here I actually have tattooed on my body. Nowadays, the Picts are known not only for their tattooed bodies, but also their skilled craftsmanship when creating intricately carved stone monuments. Now, the theory about the monuments as well is people believe they were marking stones to mark the Pictish paths, because you've got a few Pictish path stones that are up at Pitlochry that you can actually go for a hike up to see. And then you've also got ones that they believe were marking the edges of territory as well. But again, this is just pure speculation because, again, sadly, no written language. In 2023, a genetic study was published which showed Picts to be descended from ancient Iron Age populations who had lived in Britain for generations. The same, if you want to go even further back, there is links to Central Europe. The same study also showed a clear genetic continuity between the Picts and modern-day Scots in the northeast of the country. Despite the genetic evidence, activists have long pushed the idea that Britain is historically diverse. Yeah, like I said, all of this stuff has been tested. It's all been tested. They were a completely homogenous community and didn't like other people. Holy fucking shit. But anyway, a 2023 children's book entitled Brilliant Black British History claimed that black people built Stonehenge. False. Nigerian-born British author Atanuki claimed in the work that Britain was a black country for more than 7,000 years before white people came. Garbage. False. Not true. The publication, also see that Cheddar Man stuff, it turned out Cheddar Man was actually white. And you'll never guess like the ethnicity of the person that claimed they were black. But anyway, the publication went on to win the Children's Non-Fiction Book of the Year, wrong category, at the British Book Awards. And here we are at the end of the article. Now, the Picts fucking hated outsiders. They butchered every single person they came across. And even though there was some like tribes that were still around by the time of the Vikings were told specifically to avoid Scotland. They were told specifically to avoid Scotland because the Picts, despite being, filthy mud people from the memes that you've all seen, were psychopaths. They were psychopaths. And this is the problem is this is stories, but mostly from Romans, where apparently they would cover themselves in mud and like hide in the trees. And when the Romans were passing underneath, they would leap out the trees, stabbing and shrieking like fucking banshees because they were high on mushrooms and whatever the fuck else and everything. And they would like, the Romans were scared of them. There is a reason that Britain got absolutely, like England got fucking bodied, right? And then Hadrian went, nah, I'm going to do one of the biggest fucking, one of the biggest masonry projects these islands have ever seen and build a wall across the length of the fucking country. And I'm also going to cover it in fucking forts. There was a reason that they did that. Right, the Picts very famously hated outsiders and they fought like fucking ferocious demons. Right, they didn't care. Everyone says, oh, the Vikings were known for their size and martial prowess and everything. Picts did not care if they died. They did not care. And even if they'd been stabbed like 20 times, they would keep fighting. This has been written about by the Romans. The Romans were like, what the fuck are these people, right? They don't die. Man, we stab them and they keep coming, right? And it's just, yeah. So basically, they very rarely traded. Now, the Picts had a tenuous relationship with the Gaels in the West. And basically, the Gaels came from Central Europe around the Austrian mountains where they mined salt. They then took it down to the Mediterranean to trade it all along the route, which is why you get loads of Celtic settlements in like northern Portugal and then Brittany and France. Britons, guess where it comes from? And then you had them in like Cornwall, Wales, all of Ireland get colonised by the Gaels. They ended up becoming known as the Celts. And basically all the way up in the west of Scotland. They did try and progress to the east until they ran into the Picts, and that stopped very quickly. But basically, the Picts and the Gaels traded. They would like sometimes intermarry, they would do all of that stuff, but the Picts were always like, yeah, we'll trade with you, but stay on your side of the fucking fence. Right? And that's just how the Picts operated. And it is basically around 900 AD, just they disappeared. And no one really knows why, but the theory is disease. Because the problem with being such an insular people that hates outsiders is the same as like the North Sentinelese. If a common cold ever reached the North Sentinelese people, it would probably wipe them all fucking out. Right, and that's the problem. Same thing happened with like tribal contact in like South America, everything else. They get introduced to diseases that they've never experienced before, and hey ho, everybody gets fucking killed. That's the theory with the Picts, at least. But basically, there is downsides to not liking outsiders. But the problem is they get the theory is they get introduced to some horrific disease while trading, and they just got all wiped out from that. However, the Picts were a homogenous people. They did not like outsiders. They've tested skeletons and stuff, and there was a lot of inbreeding because they just didn't like outsiders. So this blackwashing crap is just a complete fucking lie. Right? I mean, you have to take our history as well as our fucking bikes.